Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Woo Pod. I am Susie and I'm here with my friend Rick.
Hello, everyone.
Today we'll be talking about some more topics related to culture. So, how have you been, Rick?
Good, thanks. My washing machine broke today, so most of my apartment is flooded, but it's okay. I'm happy to be here. Don't worry.
No, really? All over the floor?
Most of the floor, yeah. So I'm sort of like in a little island of dry bit, which is away from the washing machine. So this morning's been quite stressful, but it's okay.
Well, I appreciate you turning up to do the podcast anyway, given your crisis.
You're welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, yeah, not too shabby. Yeah, I've been feeling like I need to have more hobbies on the go, so I bought 2 books. The first was a Ludovico Einaudi piano book to start doing some solo piano. We've got a keyboard, so I'll do that. And the second was a Teach Yourself Hindi from Scratch textbook.
Pretty heavy duty hobbies there. I was going to say the first one is like you can already play the piano. That's kind of, it's not really a new hobby, it's just new music, which is great. And Einaudi is good because it's quite simple, so you can learn it quite easily and it sounds good. Hindi from scratch is quite a different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Well, I just thought that it looks and sounds nice, so I might as well give it a go. But the next step is to actually do it, because you often buy things and don't always follow through. So I'm intrigued to see if I'll actually get started.
Definitely. Let me know how you get on because it's quite a hard language. And you're very good at languages, so I want to see how good you get.
So this week we'll be talking about gap years and whether the East and the West will merge, along with some other things. So it should be interesting. Someone asked us if we've done a gap year before. Do you want to explain what a gap year is?
Yeah, so a gap year is basically, at least in the UK, I think they do it in other countries as well, but basically you finish school and then instead of going straight into university, you just go traveling for it can be a few months or it can be like 6 months or a whole year. But basically the idea is you go traveling, usually in a very kind of exotic location that you've never been to before. So you really go somewhere far. So usually in the UK, it's like the Far East or it's maybe Latin America or somewhere like that. It has to be somewhere far away. I think in the old days, people would go around Europe. I'm not sure people do that as much anymore. They've kind of gone to more extravagant places now, more further afield. So that's what a gap year is, basically. It's just a big holiday. That's all it is.
Yeah, one extended holiday just before you go to university, typically. So you're having a gap between finishing school and starting university.
And can you do a gap between university and starting work? Is that also a gap year? I think the traditional one is school, gap year, uni, but I think you can do one after uni, can't you? I did a gap month after uni. I went to America and Canada.
I would not call that a gap year.
There was a bit of traveling, but it wasn't the proper thing. My brother did it. He went to India for 6 months. So he did a proper gap year. Did you do one?
No, I didn't. Well, because I don't know about you, but we were in the year where the university fees were about to triple the following year. So if you took a gap year, you would have had to pay £9,000 a year as opposed to 3,000. So most people in my year just skipped the gap year thing.
Yeah, for people who are not from the UK or haven't lived there much. So university in the UK used to be free when our parents went. You didn't pay anything. Then by the time we came along, it was about £3,000 a year.
Yeah.
Is that what it was? Yeah, it was that, yeah. And you went for normally 3 or 4 years, sometimes longer if you did longer courses. But the year it would have been 2011, 2012, when we were going to start. And I think it's even more expensive now, or it's about the same now. It's getting higher and higher, and it's getting out of control now. It's going to be like American colleges where you pay £250,000 for 3 years.
Yeah. Guess how much I paid to do my master's at Oxford?
30 grand.
20 grand.
20 grand, that's still a lot. For one, was that 1 year? That was 1 year?
Just for 1 year, yeah. And most master's courses, I think, are about 11 grand. Because I'd already done a master's, I couldn't apply for funding from the government. So I had to self-fund.
So that's a gap year. You didn't do a gap year, but then you studied abroad within uni because you went to China, I think.
Yes, I definitely feel like I got traveling out of my system because in the second year of university, I went to Shanghai for a year. And as part of that, I did all sorts of traveling to Thailand, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia. So I did quite a lot of East Asia. But obviously living in a place and just staying in one location for a whole year is quite different to traveling around.
Yeah, definitely.
Wait, where did you say you went again?
After university, me and my friend went to Canada and America for a month. It was
Okay,
just a big
nice.
holiday, yeah, but it was really good. It was one of my favorite holidays, so it was really, really good.
Yeah, because I think a month is actually a decent amount of time. Like these days, I wouldn't go traveling for more than about a month unless I was staying like rooted in a location because you start to just feel a bit ungrounded and kind of chaotic and just dirty and stuff like that.
It's too much, and you can't wash anything, and it just, I don't know, yeah, it gets difficult, I think. But you don't seem to regret not doing one because then, yeah, as you say, you did your traveling afterwards. I think I sort of do regret not doing one because I didn't do a huge amount of traveling afterwards. But now I live abroad, so this is kind of my way of making up for it. So again, as we talked about in the first episode, I live in Dubai now, and you can travel to loads of places from Dubai quite easily. So this is my like sort of, well, it's not a gap year because I'm working, but it's like a nice way for me to like make up the time.
I think we need to explain that there's this whole thing about gap year. Like, so gap years have typically, we see them as kind of cool, but it's also, I guess, associated with kind of posh culture because maybe you have to have the money to go traveling after school before university. And a lot of those people maybe went to expensive private schools. So that's why the joke is calling it a gap year. Like, yeah, darling, I'm going on my gap year.
Which is the way a posh person would say year.
Yes, although I don't think they do actually say that, do they? But it's just a joke.
It's just like a cartoony way of saying it, yeah, gap year. And there were these really funny YouTube videos that we all watched. Do you remember the gap year videos? And it was that guy who just did like comedy routines where he was like in his gap year and he was going on adventures and then he was like getting really drunk and partying and stuff. And they were really popular. Like I think everyone our age basically knew that. They were quite famous. So yeah, but not, yeah, because not everyone could afford to. I think a lot of people's parents just paid for them to go on these gap years.
Yeah.
So it was a sort of an exclusive thing. I think, some people did work and then make the money and then go on the gap year, but a lot of people just had it paid for them. So I think there is an element of, poshness involved in the gap year.
But people are probably wondering what's the point of a gap year? Why would you go traveling when you should be getting on with your life and probably getting a job?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think when you're really young, that's your time to be doing traveling and stuff because later maybe you'll be too busy with your job or maybe a family or something and you won't have any time to do it yourself. You'll be too busy to travel. So earlier is better. And maybe even before university, if your course is really long, like a medicine course or something like that. Well, I guess when you have no responsibilities, that's the theory, I think. But I don't know when it all started because our grandparents definitely did not do anything like that. I mean, they barely went on holiday, our grandparents' generation. Our parents sort of traveled a bit. I think interrailing in Europe was big in their generation, which my dad did. And I think a lot of people of that generation did. But then all of a sudden, by the time we arrived, you had to take a year out of your life and go to... Usually the Far East is where people went, like people would go to Thailand.
Yeah, interrailing, when we say interrailing, it means going across different countries in Europe by train. You can get like a cheaper train ticket to just go around all of those countries at the same time.
Because you can get around by train really easily between countries. And we were still in the EU, so you didn't need to worry about traveling.
And then the next stereotype became Thailand for some reason, which I found out recently was maybe partly because Thailand put a lot of money into sending their food around the world. So then restaurants popping up in the UK with Thai food. And it just became this cool destination to go to because it's cheap, nice food, enough things to do.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was always about finding the place that was like cheap enough for you to go to quite easily. I think it was also popularized, films like The Beach and things like that. I'm pretty sure it's in Thailand. But anyway, it popularized at least like the Far East a little bit and, it helps with the whole like cycle. And then everyone goes there and it becomes a bit too expensive. And then you have to find a new place and it just goes on and on and on like this.
And now the most popular destination is Latin America, South America.
I've seen a lot of stuff online about going to Colombia. So it would follow with what you're saying that like, it's the new. So East Asia's entirely become too expensive then, I guess.
I guess because it was maybe relatively untouched at first. But now I think it's just full of backpackers. I have to say it hasn't really appealed to me so far. I haven't thought, oh yeah, I really want to go to South America. Like at some point, yeah, sure, but it hasn't jumped out to me.
It's growing on my list because I work with a couple of people from Latin America, Colombia and Chile. So the more I talk to them, the more I want to go. But before that, it was absolutely not on my radar at all. I think if you speak a bit of Spanish, then you're more roped into that world, but neither of us can do that, so maybe that is part of it.
That's probably the problem. Anyway. I don't know enough about it, to be honest. And I have had some bad stories of people arriving on day one and getting mugged like outside the airport, someone punching the car window and grabbing their handbag.
I mean, I'm sure that's not everyone's experience, but I think you've got to have your wits about you, I think, at least. But yeah, it's becoming very popular. So that is what a gap year is. So it's just not a thing really in some other countries, I guess.
No, and I was thinking the other reason for it is probably tied to our maybe individualistic culture about finding yourself, and also being maybe surer or more sure about what you want to do at university. So you go traveling, you think about who you are, what you want to do with your life, and then you come back and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this degree. This is my direction. So it's sort of about clarifying oneself, isn't it?
Interesting. It's quite self-indulgent, isn't it?
Yeah.
I need a whole year to figure this out, and I can only do that by going to very far-flung places. I did always, this whole thing of like finding yourself, like what you're all about, I did always find it funny that coincided with spending a lot of time on really nice beaches abroad. You never found yourself like anywhere near your hometown or like a small village in the UK somewhere. It was always, oh no, I found myself in Thailand. Just happened to be the most beautiful locations in the world, but yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting concept, because I do kind of get that if you're in an environment that's totally different, you have new thoughts and new perspectives. But I think most people who go abroad to find themselves often find they're just themselves, but in a different place. This finding yourself thing is strange, because you go out there, but actually probably you need to go within.
I would think so. Within, or at least like you can go the other way and like retrace your roots, as like a lot of people in America do. They fly back to Ireland or the UK or Germany or something like that to sort of retrace where they came from. But I think doing either, as you say, like I'm not sure if you find out that much, to be honest. As you say, it's more from like within yourself, and yeah, I'm not sure going to these locations is going to reveal that much. I do take your point about being in a new place makes you think on different lines. That's definitely true. So maybe there is some truth to it.
So I'm intrigued. Do you feel like you're finding yourself in Dubai? Because I do remember that you were wanting to go abroad. You're like, oh, that's really cool. I wish I had done more traveling. Do you feel like a changed man?
I do in some ways, yes, actually, because you meet so many people who are not only not from your country, but they maybe don't even know that much about your own country. It really makes you realize a lot about where you've come from and what's made you and what kind of person you are and your own culture. When you're immersed in your own culture, it's hard to see it for what it is because everyone's the same. So you start to realize a lot more about your own culture. It broadens your horizons as well, yeah, definitely. You're more understanding of other people, I think. You realize how big the world is and also how small it is sometimes as well. So it's definitely, you discover this going anywhere, as long as it's not your own environment and your own culture. You discover the same thing going anywhere in the world. Yeah, it's definitely been quite rewarding, I think.
Well, this brings us to our next question, which is one of our listeners asked, after living in different places, do you feel the differences more strongly, and do you find yourself appreciating Asian culture more? So I guess the Asian part is maybe directed towards me, having lived in East Asia, although Dubai also counts as Asia.
It does count as Asia, but I think because Arabic culture is so distinct, although it does share some similarities with kind of East Asian culture, which we'll talk about later, I think it's so distinct that often people, even though it is in Asia, people don't really group it with, you wouldn't call it Asian culture, you'd more call it like Arabic culture, I think. Did you find that when you were traveling, that you notice, you appreciate more things about it, or you notice more about what makes up your own culture?
I think I definitely went through a kind of arc where when I first arrived in China, I was just so excited to be there. Everything was new, enjoying the freshness of everything and discovering new things every day. I think maybe after about half a year, I started to feel very isolated and missing home a lot. It's like all the new information was at an overload point and I couldn't place it properly and I couldn't integrate myself. But then after university, then I lived in Taiwan for a couple of years. So by that point, I could speak Chinese a bit better. So that was much easier to make friends. Then I started to really appreciate the culture because I could go a bit deeper and understand why people do the things they do. Like the things I was seeing on the street made more sense. I could contextualize it from having spoken to loads of people in their native language about various things.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. It's the depth of it as well, because just traveling around on the gap year, as we discussed, like, unless you do speak the language quite well, which is probably going to be quite rare for a lot of travelers, you're only getting a kind of surface level. You're skimming across the top of the other culture, whereas you had a chance to really get underneath it and work there and have lots of friends and So yeah, you get a deeper appreciation.
I feel like you actually need to have some sort of process to integrate the knowledge rather than just being exposed to it again and again, because then that can just make you feel frustrated. Like, why is this still happening? I'm not used to this. We don't do this in my country. But then if you can speak to people and you have that curiosity to learn why things are the way they are, then I think people can start to appreciate the culture. This just so happens to be exactly what our Learn English Through Culture course, 全方位英语文化课程, is all about. I know it can be frustrating and confusing to be stuck on the outskirts of a culture, feeling like you don't really get it. So we want to help. At Suziru, we've created a comprehensive course for intermediate to advanced learners who want to improve their everyday English, boost their confidence in social situations, and finally understand how British people really think and speak. Through our unique cultural lens, you'll learn how to connect more naturally in small talk, conversations, and deeper discussions, whether you're preparing to study abroad, planning your career, or simply craving a more authentic understanding of the UK. Each week, you'll watch a short, engaging video on a different aspect of UK life and culture. Then, in your live class with our excellent qualified teachers, you'll dive into rich, thought-provoking discussions. It's the perfect, low-pressure space to practice the vocabulary and expressions you've learned, and most importantly, to make real progress in your spoken English. Want to expand your global perspective? Preparing for IELTS or university abroad? Planning to take the Life in the UK test for citizenship? This course has you covered. With fresh weekly topics, spontaneous conversation, and expert cultural guidance, you'll be building language skills that go far beyond the textbook and learning to express yourself with confidence in real-life contexts. As Joanne said, this is online learning at its best. We think you'll love it too. Ready to get started? Join us at suziru.com/culture. But coming back to the UK is always really interesting. Have you found that so far? Every time you come back to the UK, it's like, wow, I'm seeing this with new eyes.
100%. I think I was, especially coming back to London, because we talked on the last episode about living in London. Coming back to London the first time last year, I was really struck by like a lot of London's shortcomings, a lot more than I was before I left. It's as you say, it's like it's like an arc that you go on. I think sometimes you really see the problems of your own country that you would like to fix, but then as well you go back and you really appreciate those things as well. So you sort of get a big dose of both of those things. You see the good and the bad a lot more clearly. Whereas when you're growing up, it's just the way it is. You can't see past it at all. Even though you might have gone on a lot of family holidays and things like that, it's just not nearly enough to really see it from a different perspective. So yeah, I appreciate a lot more things about the UK, even things like the weather, which I never thought I would ever say about the UK, because obviously over here it's very, very hot. Sometimes you can't even go outside for very long. But in the UK, yeah, even though there's rain and storms and everything, you can still go outside a lot, and yeah, so many different things actually. But I'd recommend that to everyone, to be honest, if you can do it, even just for 6 months or something, just to go and live in a different country.
Yeah, definitely. It helps give some context to the world outside of your own country. But I definitely found that coming back to live long term in the UK, I started to idolize Asia. Things function so much better there. And I was thinking of all the positive aspects. Now that I've been back and forth quite a few times, I'm also seeing there's the flip side. It's never just all positive. There's also less good aspects. So I feel like it's becoming more balanced. Like, okay, the UK has these problems, but there's also things that are good about it and vice versa.
I think that seems to be the recurring theme a lot of the time, is like when you are really able to take something in properly, you end up with a very 3D kind of nuanced view of things. It's never just one or the other. But when you start out, it's often just a very black and white thing. And then you get to a point and you begin, oh, I can see the good and the bad, and that's kind of it. But I probably haven't been out for as long as you have, so maybe I'm not quite at that stage yet.
How long have you been there now?
Nearly 2 years. It is getting to be a long time, but it is a bit different because everybody here does speak English. So it's not quite, there's no language barrier. In some ways, it's quite westernized. In others, it isn't. But yeah, I would say it's easier to sort of get used to things here than maybe the shock of when you went to East Asia for the first few times. I think it's not quite as extreme.
Yeah, there's something quite challenging about always having to speak your second language. Very frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, whereas I've not quite had that. But the thing you say about like things being run better, I definitely have felt. And then when you go back to the UK, you sort of think, oh, why can't we just get it together. I've definitely had that frustration. Yeah, for sure. Because you just think, what is the reason that we can't just do things like trains or buses? Even though we've been doing them for like over a century and they don't work very well.
Now, the next listener question, we put out an open question on Instagram, which was, what questions related to Eastern and Western cultures would you like us to answer? And someone said, how does filial piety compare in Eastern and Western cultures? So it basically doesn't exist, does it, filial piety?
Well, we should explain what that means, because that's quite an old-fashioned way of explaining. It's basically just loyalty to your parents, right?
Well, because I think filial piety is very specific to how you need to behave, like particular expectations.
Yeah, I think it's quite it reflects the West very accurately, because it varies from family to family. So it's that classic Western thing of, it's all about the individual and your own personal take on it. Is that, yeah, your relationship with your parents can vary quite a lot. So some people still do have very, what I would call more like old-fashioned relationships with their parents, where it's much more strict, and their parents have very specific expectations of them for like jobs, who they marry even, how they behave, all of this stuff. Then you have, on the complete other side, you have people where they get to a certain age and then they're basically sort of just friends with their parents. And I would say most people are kind of in between those, but you get all kinds of different expectations. Whereas maybe more in the East, there's a kind of a shared understanding of like how you should really behave with your parents. There'll be variations, of course, but I think, yeah, there's more of a shared understanding of this is how you should be with your parents, really.
Yeah, and I think there's generally more shame associated with not being a particular way with your parents.
Yeah, it can be quite it's like a taboo. It's like a line you don't cross with a lot of things. With like, I've had some friends who are from various places in Asia sort of say like, oh, I could never say that to my parents, or oh, that would be impossible with my parents, or even into adulthood, which I've noticed, there's just like answering back to them to past a certain point. The point at which you can do that is much more restricted maybe in Asian cultures than it is in Western cultures. Whereas, yeah, in Western cultures, you're having sort of full-blown rows with your parents from like quite a young age, and then it's just kind of swept under the rug and you continue as normal. But that sort of stuff just wouldn't be acceptable in other cultures.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of disrespect towards parents, I think, and it's almost tolerated because it's seen as the child becoming their own person, and so their individuality is sort of celebrated. Like, not by everyone. Like, I don't think people want their child to be disrespectful. Like, it's sort of maybe more frowned upon to really lay down the law a lot of the time, and to be like, you respect me no matter what. It's almost like that's seen as anti-freedom or something.
Yes, I definitely think so. I think it's now seen in the West as just being a bit too harsh and sort of authoritarian, a bit sort of maybe dictatorial. It's associated with like traumatizing your child in some ways, or bullying them, stuff like never apologizing to them, things like that. A rise of a phenomenon known as gentle parenting, which is quite popular among our generation who are now starting to have children. Yeah, it's just kind of about not telling them off as harshly and letting them do what they want, and et cetera, et cetera. Always trying to empathize, always trying to understand, which I agree with up to a point, but I think sort of avoiding any kind of confrontation isn't probably going to be helpful either. We may be open to accusations from other cultures that we're kind of going too far with this, maybe. And they might have a point, I think.
Before it was like, child obeys parent no matter what. And then it's sort of through this gentle parenting, like for the benefit of the growing child, people would start to be kinder to their children. But then there's taking that too far, which is not being kind to yourself, because your child is just sort of ruling the roost. So then, like, I think I've been reading some stuff about how it should be a negotiation between the two. So you share how you feel, and you try to understand how the child feels, and then you explain your perspective, and then hope the child will sort of understand. So you're sort of laying down the law, but in a more gentle way. Like, oh, I know you are really sad, you really want that ice cream, but we can't right now, and that's it. So you're not raising your voice. Keep reiterating the boundary, and then keep empathizing.
Yes, that's what I've noticed among some parents. That seems to be the new balance of getting it. So yeah, you're not like letting them do whatever they want, but you're not just going like crazy all the time either. So it's kind of being firm in a sort of soft way. It's quite hard to describe, really. Can't even understand like what we're talking about. But yeah, it's like not raising your voice, and definitely not hitting them or anything like that. I think that's actually illegal in the UK now, and in a lot of countries in at least in the West, if not more countries. I think that came in when we were still at school. Yeah, you can't do that anymore.
I thought it's before that.
No, I think in England at least.
Did you get hit as a child?
I did, yes. I used to think it didn't really matter either way, but I think now, looking back, I would never hit my own children.
Did you get hit a lot?
No, only for certain things, but it's obviously still not very, it's not pleasant. And I don't think it doesn't lead to a very good relationship, I think, between the parent and the child necessarily. Like, I think there's just, if you can discipline your kids without hitting them, which you can, then you shouldn't hit them. But I used to think, because it's so normalized in the way that you were parented. And actually, interestingly, sometimes when I speak to my friends from different parts of Asia, they're often surprised to learn that I was hit when I was a kid, because they, in their imagination, all Western parents had stopped doing that decades ago. I think ours was probably the last generation where it was like quite a few parents still did it, but it was definitely dying out a lot by the time we came along, for sure.
Maybe has recently become illegal, so you're sort of dancing with the law at a certain point.
I think another big aspect of it seems to be your parents kind of shaping a lot of your big life decisions, and also being expected to spend like a lot more time with your parents sometimes.
Yeah, especially looking after them in older age. In the UK, there's not, I mean, there kind of is an expectation in a way, but at the same time, nothing's really going to happen if you don't look after your parents, especially if you're not living close. No one would really judge you that harshly, I don't think. There's no real consequence.
It's almost something you're expected to kind of manage for yourself, like what you want to do with how you want to be looked after in your old age. You know, you're always expected to have money set aside if you need to go into a home or something like that. Or I think the idea of moving in with one of your children is kind of, that might be a really nice thing that they do for you, but it's not an expectation on the side of the kid. You do still hear about it. I think definitely not as often. I think it was much, much more common, again, probably going back to like grandparents' generation. But I think these days you do hear about it occasionally, but yeah, not as much.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, someone from Taiwan recently said to me, why do people ask how my parents are sometimes? Because they're like, if someone asked how my parent was in Taiwan, that would probably mean that they're sick or in hospital or something. And I kind of know what they mean, because sometimes we'll be like, oh yeah, how are your parents? Almost as if they're some friends you're inquiring about.
Maybe that's quite telling, actually, yeah, that we just think of it in this way. Actually, in connection to that, I've heard that, again, in Eastern cultures, the idea of addressing your parents by their first names is just absolutely not on.
I do find it a bit strange when people do that in the UK. I always think, what's the reason why you would want to call your mum or dad by their first name?
I've had this discussion as well with friends in the UK, and I know I've got two close friends who do it, and one of them did it even as a kid, which I felt was quite strange. It's not something I do, but it is quite common.
I think it's a sign that the child wants to distance themselves from the parent.
Well, I asked my friend about this, and she just said it was a sign of sort of like the kid maturing and sort of almost becoming equals with the parent, because once you're an adult, they're an adult, and you're just kind of both adults now. You're not like a kid anymore. I guess we're probably more reluctant to kind of go down that route, because the dynamic is always kind of there in some way, and your relationship isn't just like two people. It's not like someone you work with or a friend or something.
Yeah.
That there's always, it's deeper than that, isn't it? And I think you honor that by saying mum and dad. Well, I'm not going to start calling my dad Alan all of a sudden. It's just a bit even just seems laughable to do it. But yeah, some people, it's fairly common, I think.
Yeah, I only do it if I'm doing some sort of ironic joke.
Well, certainly not with my family. It's just not something anybody does.
Why? What's wrong with calling your parent mum or dad? Because they always have that relationship to you. Like, why would you want to change that?
I just think it's just a completely different take on it. To them, it's just like, yeah, like we don't have to do that anymore. You know, I'm grown up now. We're not sort of like parent and child anymore. So it's just like a sort of rite of passage almost. But then, as I say, one of my friends did it as a kid. So I don't know, maybe it's just a level of informality that even we're not used to. But I've been told, yeah, in across Asia, it would be extremely rare, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's just that extreme move towards individualism. It's like, I don't even belong to a family. No one even birthed me. I'm just me. Yeah. I don't have a mum.
Yeah, it's kind of scary when you put it like that. But
So what's your relationship like with your dad?
I would say really put a lot of effort into like looking after us and helping us through school and uni and stuff like that. But he doesn't seem to expect a lot in return. I think, you know, he's 70 now, and as he gets a bit older, we will definitely be pitching in more to like help him and stuff. But yeah, it's like it's something that's not clear to me what exactly that's going to look like. Obviously it depends, I really hope he doesn't have any sort of health problems or anything like that. It's not obvious to me how much or how little we'd be doing, to be honest. We've also got to factor in my brother lives quite far away from him. I currently live in a different continent, although, so it's all kind of up in the air really at the moment. But
So my dad wouldn't say anything about, don't you want to be closer to me?
nope, he would never say that. And he never pushed me towards any kind of job. He would never say, we would barely even say, you don't call enough or message enough or something. I think he said that like once or twice in my life. So very hands off. When we were growing up, you could more or less do what you wanted. There was a good amount of trust there. He wasn't strict about coming back for things. So yeah, because sort of, I guess, a classically Western parent, really. So yeah, very, very hands off, I would say. Definitely couldn't call him by his first name. He wouldn't like that, which I think is fair. So there's a level of informality he would draw the line at. But yeah, generally speaking, like there's not much that he seems to feel that we owe him. If anything, he's still helping us even into our late 20s and 30s, really. So it's, I guess, very Western in that sense. But what about you?
And it's quite self-sacrificing, isn't it? Because I would say my parents are pretty much the same. They're just still helping. It's still very much parent-child relationship, I would say. And I think they put up with quite a lot of, I guess, demanding behavior or like disrespect, which is sort of like, it's jokes, but at the same time, it's kind of disrespectful, I think.
But then if that's coming from them to you guys as well, then that's sort of...
They've modeled that behavior. And so then I think they can't be surprised if we're behaving the same towards them.
Well, then that's just how it is. But it's just funny that like that's very particular to your family. It's not so much the case with my family. But it's funny actually because I remember when my brother got married last year, he put in some jokes in his wedding speech about my dad. When his wife saw them, my brother's wife is from Ukraine. When she saw them, she was like, "You can't say that about your dad on your wedding. That's really not okay," and everything. And to us, it was just like the most normal joke. Like it really wasn't that bad. It really wasn't. But it's just funny how it varies so much from family to family, whereas maybe in other cultures it doesn't so much. There's more of you could almost guess what the dynamic would be.
Because I get the feeling that maybe our parents' generation are looking after their children more than their previous generations would have. As in, we're in our 30s. I think when my parents were in their 30s, they would have been much more independent. Like, I mean, to be honest, like we are independent, but there's still the sense of they're there to help. Maybe that was always the case.
I think part of it's like economic as well, because we have this whole millennial thing of everything's too expensive. We live at home later. We can't afford houses. University's more expensive. Their generation was able to like save a lot and had a lot of good fortune economically. So I think that plays a part of it. But I do wonder if we'll have the same level of helicopter parenting, which is a phrase meaning like you hover near your children all the time trying to help them. I do wonder if like because we're so used to being looked after ourselves, are we going to be looking after...
Will we learn that from our own parents, or we're just going to stay juvenile forever?
For a lot of millennial parents, we won't even have the means to look after our kids to that extent. So maybe our generation will have to teach them to be super independent earlier, because we know that we won't be able to pay for everything, help them out,
That's what I'm planning. Yeah, get the cooking, cleaning from a young age, teach them about business, get them to do a side hustle from a young age. Yeah. It's total opposite for my parents. My parents were like, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to help with the cooking, the cleaning. You don't even need to get a job. Just work on your studies. That was it. Just get good grades at school. That's sort of all they cared about.
Again, I hate to admit it, but we did very little around the house, to be honest. And my dad was a single parent as well, so it was like even more work on him. And yeah, we didn't do like anything, like absolutely anything around the house.
I think their perspective is that the way to get a good job in life is to just go to a good university. That's the key. In their generation. Obviously, it's changed now, and we're a bit more like, you kind of need to have 3 different side hustles going on or something.
I think because it worked for them, they maybe thought, well, if we can just make our kids focus on studying, then it'll pay off for them as well. But they just didn't anticipate all of the changes that we've seen with how expensive things are and how many people would go to uni and how devalued a degree would become. And it was a good game plan when they started, but by the time we grew up, it was maybe not such a strong game plan. But it'll be interesting to see how it changes between our generation and the next.
Definitely. I saw a psychological study that was like, what is the biggest predictor of happiness in later life? It's working as a child. Which makes sense because you're contributing to something and you feel useful. Basically, you feel useful and you feel like you're able to contribute. So then I think later on you then do that and feel good about it rather than like, oh, I don't want to do anything.
I would love to know who commissioned this study, but equally, I would like to read it and find out more about it. Working as a child. Okay. Well, I didn't do very much. I didn't basically do any of that as a child. Yeah. So maybe that does explain a lot, I will say. Troubling. Maybe that's for another episode.
Next week are traumas as a child. Cool. So thanks for listening, guys. Remember to send in your questions so that we can get round to your favorite topic. Next week, we'll be diving into humor differences between Eastern and Western cultures.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, keep sending in the questions and see you next time.